I was sure that my life was perfect, a successful husband, a strong marriage, happiness that everyone envied. But one day I found out about the betrayal, and that was just the beginning. What happened next surpassed all my worst guesses. Can you imagine what my husband did? And most importantly, how I responded. Stay with me to find out the whole truth. My name is Lauren, and I have been married to Nick for 7 years. From the outside, our family life always seemed perfect. We had a beautiful home, stable incomes, and most importantly, mutual support. At least, that's how it appeared to our friends and acquaintances. We were the couple everyone envied because we almost never had major arguments. Nick and I met when I was still an art student, and he was working on a tech startup. Back then, he dreamed of building a big company, while I aspired to open my own art gallery. When we got married, it felt like we were on a path to creating a great success story together. The first few years of our marriage were truly magical. We traveled, supported each other's dreams, and talked endlessly about the future, what kind of children we would have, and when we would be ready for them. Our kitchen was often filled with friends, and we were the heart of every gathering. But, as often happens over time, we both became too absorbed in our own pursuits. Nick was busy growing his startup, while I was advancing as a creative manager at an art gallery. We frequently stayed late at work. Our evening conversations were reduced to a quick, "How was your day?" And on weekends, we sometimes did our own thing because I just need to finish a few things. I noticed that the passion between us was fading. We hugged less, rarely shared our deepest thoughts, and intimacy became an occasional event rather than a constant in our lives. But we didn't fight. We had simply accepted that we both had our own responsibilities. Nick never raised his voice, and I never confronted him, so to our friends, it seemed like we had no problems at all. Sometimes, I caught myself longing for excitement or the romance we once had. But I kept convincing myself that all couples go through a phase of cooling down, so I never brought it up with Nick. Maybe if we had talked about it back then, things would have turned out differently. But I remained silent, and Nick, it seemed, wasn't in a hurry to change anything either. Every now and then, the topic of polyamory or open relationships would slip into our conversations, but it was always framed as a joke. For example, when discussing a TV series about swingers with friends, Nick would occasionally say, "What if we tried that to bring back the sparks?" I would just laugh it off, assuming he wasn't serious. I never imagined that this idea, one I had brushed off as nothing more than a joke, would eventually lead us down a path that would push our marriage to the breaking point. This was our life before one harmless suggestion turned everything upside down. About a year had passed since I first noticed the spark in our marriage with Nick beginning to fade. We lived like good friends, no conflicts, but also none of the passion that once bound us together. More than once, I thought about bringing it up, but I always held back, afraid of shattering the fragile harmony we had left. One evening, we were having dinner when Nick started talking about a couple we knew who supposedly had an open relationship. I half listened, assuming it was just another bit of gossip. But then he exhaled deeply and said, "Lauren, what if we tried something like that? I mean, swinging, or at least allowing ourselves to explore emotions with other people's." I froze, my fork suspended midair. Was he joking? But his face was serious, the same look he had when discussing his work or big future plans. You're not joking?" I barely managed to ask. Nick looked down, and then back at me. "I feel like we're both a little tired. Maybe this would bring back the excitement." He started explaining how open relationships had supposedly saved many marriages. That he didn't want to lose me, but also didn't want to suppress his desires, or mine, when new attractions arose. It felt like a bolt of lightning had struck me. I had never seriously considered the idea of sharing my husband with another woman, nor could I imagine myself being with someone else outside our marriage. Sure, I had seen movies and heard stories, but I always thought of it as some exotic concept that had nothing to do with me. What about jealousy? What if someone truly falls in love? I asked the most logical question I could think of. Nick sighed. We'll set boundaries. We'll agree that it's just physical or, at most, lightly emotional. No deep attachments. And if either of us ever feels like the rules are being broken, we'll be honest about it. It sounded strange, but his confidence stunned me. I felt something between fear and a strange, unexpected curiosity. Was he really suggesting that we give each other the green light to be with other people? For days, I walked around lost in thought, barely focusing on work or house chores. His words kept echoing in my mind. We'll set boundaries. This will save our marriage. Wasn't this too risky? Wouldn't it lead to complete disaster? A part of me was outraged. How could he suggest this? Am I not enough for him? But another part of me, to my own surprise, felt intrigued. What if we actually tried? Maybe I'd rediscover the passion I've been missing. Nick didn't let go of the idea. He insisted that we could establish clear rules to avoid complications. No dating friends or coworkers to keep things simple. No bringing partners home. All encounters should happen outside our shared space. Full honesty about any intimate experiences, but no unnecessary details. If jealousy or discomfort arises, we stop immediately. Listening to him, I was amazed by how confident he sounded, as if he had figured out the perfect formula to free our marriage from monotony. But deep inside, I knew that real emotions rarely followed neat, logical rules. What if one of us actually fell for someone else? What if passion became something more than just a temporary thrill? Eventually, I agreed to at least consider it. That night, lying in bed, I imagined what this openness might look like. Scenes from movies and TV shows about polyamory and swinging flashed in my mind. And for the first time, I admitted to myself that beneath all the anxiety, I felt a subtle thrill. Would this reignite the passion between Nick and me? Or would it destroy everything? But one thought haunted me the most. If Nick was already suggesting this, did it mean he already had someone in mind? Maybe he wasn't asking for permission. Maybe he was just trying to legitimize something that had already begun. That realization sent a chill down my spine. The thought of having an official permission to meet someone outside of my marriage still made me anxious. But Nick was persistent, while also giving me the space to decide. For a few days, we lived in a sort of suspense, waiting for my answer. And then, to my own surprise, I realized that I wanted to try. Maybe the thought that this might actually reignite our passion influenced me more than I admitted. One evening, Nick and I sat down at the kitchen table and laid everything out openly. No hiding meetings, but no detailed reports on intimacy. No involving friends or colleagues to keep things from getting complicated. If jealousy arises, we talk about it immediately. No bottling things up. Only casual flings. No full-fledged second relationships. This was, of course, the hardest part, because emotions are rarely fully controllable. I listened to Nick and could tell that, despite his confident tone, he was just as nervous as I was. We were both scared, but also undeniably intrigued. It was a strange mix of curiosity and fear that could lead anywhere. To make things more structured, Nick suggested that I sign up on a themed dating site for people exploring open relationships or the swinging lifestyle. I laughed as I filled out my profile for the first time. It felt so surreal. Who would have thought that after 7 years of marriage, I'd be writing something like, looking for lighthearted adventures and new experiences? Despite my initial discomfort, I couldn't deny the small rush of excitement. What if I actually meet someone who makes me feel desired and appreciated again? Within days, I started getting messages from various men. Some were polite, others were far too forward with explicit proposals. I was surprised at how many people were eager to borrow another person's spouse. One day, I finally decided to meet someone who seemed charming in our chats. His name was Ethan. We agreed to meet at a small bar on the other side of town to lower the risk of running into someone we knew. Nick was aware of the date and even encouraged me. Just don't be nervous, be yourself. When I arrived, my heart was pounding. Ethan was pleasant enough, but I quickly realized that this wasn't some instant chemistry situation. It was more like simple curiosity. We chatted about hobbies, work, and daily life. He shared that he was also married and that his wife fully supported their open arrangement. Hearing someone talk so casually about having extramarital affairs was surreal. By the end of the evening, he suggested meeting again. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to, but then I reminded myself, I came for this experience, so I should at least try. As I left the bar, I sent Nick a short message. Everything's fine heading home. When I got home, I found Nick sitting on the couch, the TV off. His expression was hard to read, a mix of curiosity and something else, something close to jealousy. He forced a smile. So, how was it? You got back pretty quickly? I reassured him that nothing physical had happened, that we had just talked. But I could see the tension in his jaw. For the first time, he was experiencing what it meant to share me with another man. Later, I agreed to meet Ethan again, knowing that this time, we might go further. But as I sat there with him, sipping wine, I felt a strange emptiness. I realized I didn't actually want to sleep with someone I had no real emotional connection with. Maybe this was my biggest fear all along, that a purely physical experience would feel meaningless. We hugged at the end of the evening, but nothing more. I told him honestly that I wasn't sure I was ready for a casual affair. He nodded understandingly and thanked me for my honesty. When I got home, Nick looked at me, surprised. Back so soon? I explained that it just wasn't for me, that Ethan wasn't my person. But deep inside, I started to wonder, if I wasn't interested in casual flings, then what was I actually looking for? While I was still uncertain about whether this experience was right for me, Nick seemed to be moving forward with confidence. He also created a profile on a swingers/open relationship site and, unlike me, quickly found someone he had a lot in common with. He called her Carol. One evening, he casually announced, "Lauren, I'm meeting Carol tonight. She's also in an open marriage, so everything is safe." There was excitement in his voice, almost childlike enthusiasm. I forced a neutral response. Of course, have a great time, but inside, something twisted painfully. I felt exactly what Nick had probably felt when I went on my first date. But the difference was, he looked thrilled. Had he really found someone who excited him more than I did? That night, I was home alone, constantly checking the time. Where is he? Why is he staying out so late? I couldn't help but wonder if this was just harmless fun, or if something deeper was developing. Nick came home around 1 a.m. I was awake, but pretended to be asleep. He entered the bedroom in a strangely elated mood, and jealousy burned inside me. I couldn't hide my expression. "So, how was your night?" I asked, trying to sound neutral. "Carol is really interesting. We talked about so much. I never thought we'd have so much in common," he said, almost dreamily. Hearing him speak about another woman with such enthusiasm was far harder than I had expected. And what about me? I thought. After all, he was the one who initiated this open relationship, so why did I feel like I was the one being left behind? Days passed, and I noticed that Nick was spending more and more time texting Carol, even when we were home together. It frustrated me, but I reminded myself of the rules. No fights. Give each other freedom. One night, he hesitated before saying, "Carol and I are planning a weekend getaway just somewhere quiet. I wanted to check if you'd be okay with that." "Of course not," my heart screamed. But out loud, I only said, "Do what you think is best. This is what we agreed on, right?" Nick studied my face for a moment before adding, "You can also spend time with someone else if you want." Something about the way he said that felt like a challenge. Subconsciously, I needed a distraction. Maybe even revenge. I became more active on dating apps, realizing that I wasn't just looking for casual intimacy. I wanted emotional validation. Or maybe I just wanted to make Nick feel the way I did. Eventually, I set up a date with Liam, a divorced artist who didn't believe in monogamy. He was charming and full of creative energy. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and I felt an undeniable spark, something I hadn't felt with Ethan. Now, I was juggling two realities. Wondering how deep Nick's connection with Carol was growing. Exploring my own newfound chemistry with Liam. At home, Nick and I talked like roommates rather than lovers. "Did you buy bread? Can you pay the electric bills? Are we both home for dinner tomorrow?" There was zero romance left in our conversations. One night, I finally asked him, "Are you happy we did this? I mean, opening up our marriage?" He hesitated. I thought it would bring us closer, but he stopped, as if searching for the right words. I stayed silent because I wasn't sure if I should admit the same thing, that I was drowning in jealousy over Carol, but at the same time, I was on the verge of diving into an affair with Liam. Deep down, I knew the rules we had set weren't saving our marriage. They were just separating us further. I feared that Nick and Carol would turn into something real, not just a fling. And he, perhaps, feared the same about me. But instead of talking about it honestly, we both kept playing the game of, "I have the right to my freedom." A month had passed since the start of their open relationship experiment. Lauren and Nick had agreed to follow their rules, but in reality, both were moving in separate directions. Nick was growing increasingly close to Carol, while Lauren was searching for intimacy with Liam, yet at home, she was left with a deep sense of emptiness. What had started as a way to reignite passion was now descending into complete emotional chaos. After a few meetings, Liam, the unconventional artist with a non-traditional view of the world, had captivated Lauren in a way no one else had. He didn't just attract her as a woman, he engaged her mind. One evening, he invited her to his studio, showing unfinished canvases, telling her stories of his travels, and explaining why he didn't believe in monogamy. "Love shouldn't have boundaries," he said. "But that doesn't mean people don't suffer from jealousy. It all depends on emotional maturity." Lauren smiled, listening carefully. Liam seemed so self-assured, yet he never pressured her. He didn't demand explanations about her marriage or why she had agreed to open their relationship. He simply accepted her for who she was. This was so different from Ethan, her previous attempt at casual dating. With Liam, there was something deeper, something that felt like a romantic pull. And suddenly, Lauren realized the truth. Keeping things strictly physical in an open relationship was a fantasy. Feelings were inevitable. Nick wasn't sitting idle either. His dates with Carol became more frequent, and each time he came home late, Lauren could see the sparkle in his eyes, a look she remembered from the early years of their marriage. But at home, something changed. He seemed more distant, yet strangely melancholic. One evening, as he walked in the door, Lauren caught the faint scent of another woman's perfume. She sat on the couch, waiting for him. "How was your date?" she asked casually, though her voice was tight. "It was nice," Nick replied, taking off his jacket. "We had a great time." His words were simple, but Lauren felt the weight behind them. Was he hiding something? Maybe he no longer wanted to share details because he knew it would hurt her. And the truth was, Lauren wasn't sharing anything about Liam either. Their open marriage had turned into something else, a silent agreement where they merely pretended their separate lives weren't destroying their connection. But then things shifted. Lauren started spending more time with Liam, staying out late, even coming home at dawn. And suddenly Nick changed. One morning, he confronted her in the hallway, arms crossed. "Are you sure you're not getting too emotionally involved?" he asked, his voice laced with bitterness. "Are you seriously asking me that?" Lauren shot back. "And what about you and Carol? Is that just casual fun?" Nick froze. For the first time, he looked genuinely shocked, as if he hadn't expected her to throw his own argument back at him. Their eyes locked, and in the silence, the tension between them felt suffocating. The conversation Lauren feared most happened soon after. Nick had just stepped into the shower when his phone buzzed on the table. It was Carol. Lauren hesitated. "Should I answer?" Her hands trembled as she picked up the call. Carol's voice faltered for a second before she composed herself. "Oh, you must be Lauren. I was hoping to talk to Nick. Can you tell him I'm really looking forward to tonight? You know, things are getting really serious between us." Lauren's stomach dropped. Serious? They had never discussed the possibility of falling in love. Panic gripped her. "I'll pass the message," she mumbled, then hung up. When she caught her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face was twisted with fear and betrayal. Had Nick already found something with Carol that was more than just sex? Still shaken, Lauren rushed to Liam's studio, seeking comfort. He immediately noticed something was wrong. "You look pale. What happened?" "My husband," Lauren started, but her voice caught. She didn't know how to explain it. Finally, she admitted, "I think I'm jealous. I didn't expect to feel this way." Liam listened quietly before wrapping an arm around her, his touch warm and gentle. He leaned in for a kiss, soft, unhurried. But for the first time, it didn't feel like an escape. It didn't help, because no matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise, the truth was clear. She had agreed to this. So, why was she falling apart? Liam's eyes searched hers. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked gently. "I don't want to see you hurting." Lauren swallowed hard, because deep down she already knew. This wasn't just fun anymore. This was a disaster waiting to explode. Time seemed to speed up, and with each passing day, I felt that Nick and I were not just navigating the idea of an open relationship, we were drowning in it. His meetings with Carol became more frequent and lasted longer. Meanwhile, I sought comfort in Liam's arms, but every time I returned home, I was left with a painful feeling that I wasn't just betraying Nick, I was betraying myself. The jealousy between us had become obvious. Every meeting outside our home ended either in silent sadness or aggressive tension. Even when we tried to talk about our day, there were always underlying jabs. "How's Liam?" "Still painting your world in bright colors," Nick would say sarcastically. "And I see you don't have time for your wife anymore because all your attention is on Carol, huh?" I would snap back. Instead of bringing us closer, this arrangement had turned into a breeding ground for conflict. Instead of freedom, we found ourselves trapped in our own jealousy and doubts. Whenever Nick came home looking too happy after a night with Carol, I felt a dull ache of envy. Does he love her more than me now? And when I spent more and more time with Liam, I noticed the way Nick watched me. He saw that I looked happier and more inspired with Liam than I had in a long time at home. Eventually, our arguments became more frequent and louder. "Why don't you want to spend at least one evening with me? Why are you always with her instead of me?" Technically, we were both following the rules of our open relationship. But deep down, we both felt the same resentment. We could no longer pretend that we had control over this. One evening, Nick tried to rekindle our spark. Let's have a romantic night together. Just us, he suggested. Let's remind ourselves that we're still husband and wife. I agreed, secretly hoping to bring back even a fragment of what we once had. He cooked dinner, lit candles, and brought my favorite wine. For a while, it felt nice. We laughed, reminiscing about old trips and inside jokes. But the moment one of us mentioned Carol or Liam, an awkward silence filled the air. We were too afraid to admit the truth, that we had already gone too far. That night, when Nick reached for me, I let him hold me. But the warmth was gone. We both felt it. He sighed, as if finally realizing. Our spark was nothing more than a fading illusion. One evening, I overheard Nick talking about Carol. Apparently, she had started hinting that she wanted something more serious. She wasn't just interested in casual fun. She wanted Nick completely. Hearing this cut deeper than I expected. Meanwhile, Liam had also started acting differently. He gave me flowers, invited me on weekend getaways, which I always declined. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew disappearing for an entire weekend would break something irreversible. But then Liam looked into my eyes and said, "Lauren, I don't think this is just physical. You understand me like no one else." And that terrified me just as much as Carol's influence over Nick. More and more, I found myself thinking, this is going to end in a breakup. Should we stop? But even if I was starting to hesitate, I could see that Nick was already too emotionally involved with Carol. And if I was being honest with myself, I was too involved with Liam. Then one night, when we were alone, we finally said the words we had been avoiding. If you're so drawn to Liam and I'm drawn to Carol, is there even a point in keeping this marriage together? Nick asked, his voice bitter. You started this game, I whispered, barely holding back tears. We both knew the truth. Open relationships hadn't saved our marriage. They had destroyed it. After that tense evening, an unsettling silence settled between Nick and me. We no longer fought, no longer threw sarcastic remarks at each other. We even avoided eye contact. Our home, once filled with life, had turned into a place where cold politeness replaced genuine warmth. But in every word, in every movement, there was a feeling of something brewing. A silence before the storm. One day, Nick finally broke the silence. He approached me as I stood by the window and said, "Lauren, let's take a break." I turned to him, confused. What do you mean? We're both lost. I'm not saying divorce yet, but maybe we need time apart to figure out if we even still need each other. His words hit me like a lightning bolt. I froze, searching for something to say. A break? Wasn't that just a polite way of saying he wanted to be with Carol completely? I needed clarity, so I met with Liam in his art studio. Among the scent of paint and coffee, I finally let it all out. Nick wants a break. He says it's to figure out if we have a future. But I don't believe that. This isn't a pause. This is the end. Liam listened intently, holding my hand. Then he said something that shook me. Maybe this is your chance, Lauren. Your chance to start fresh. Think, do you really want to hold on to something that's already broken? His words brought tears to my eyes. Was I really ready to let go of Nick? Could Liam be the one to fill the void he left behind? When Nick packed his things, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching as he neatly folded his shirts into a suitcase. Every movement looked mechanical, but in his eyes, I saw an internal struggle. Lauren, this doesn't mean I don't love you, he finally said, looking at me. Then why are you leaving? If you love me, why walk away? I whispered, my heart clenching, because we destroyed what we had. And I don't know how to fix it. And I don't think you do either. His words stung, because they were true. Neither of us knew how to save what we had spent years building. When Nick walked out the door, the house became silent again. I sat on the couch, staring out the window, feeling the emptiness swallow me. It felt like time had stopped. Liam tried to be there for me, to comfort me, but even his presence couldn't fill the vacuum Nick left behind. I realized that I had lost more than just a husband. I had lost a part of myself. A few days later, I accidentally saw Nick at a cafe. He was sitting with Carol. They were laughing. He looked happy. And I stood outside, looking in, feeling like a stranger in my own world. That's when I understood. Our marriage wasn't just a connection between two people. It was an entire world that was now falling apart. And I wasn't sure if I could build a new world without Nick. Time passed, and each day my life became more complicated. After Nick left, I thought I would grow stronger, but every new morning reminded me how lonely I was. Liam tried to be there for me, but his support no longer felt as important. I began to realize that something inside me had changed forever. One evening, Liam invited me to dinner. We sat in a cozy restaurant, sipping wine, but the atmosphere was tense. He seemed to notice it. "Lauren, you seem distant. Did something happen?" he asked, leaning toward me. I looked at him and finally voiced what had been tormenting me all this time. "Liam, you're wonderful, but I'm not sure if I can continue this anymore. I'm confused." His eyes filled with sadness, but he nodded. "I understand. Do you still love Nick?" I fell silent, unsure of how to answer. Do I love him? Or are these just memories of what once was? One day, while walking through the city, I accidentally ran into Nick. He was with Carol, but when he saw me, he stopped. Carol silently stepped aside, leaving us alone. "Lauren," he started, but I cut him off. "What do you want to say, Nick? That you're happy with her? That you've moved on?" My voice carried both pain and anger. He shook his head. "I wanted to say that I regret it, but I don't know how to fix everything." His words caught me off guard. Regret? Then why was he still with her? The next day, Carol came to see me. It was unexpected, but I decided to hear her out. "Lauren, I know you still love Nick, but you have to understand, he's with me now, and you have to accept that." Her words were cold, but there was uncertainty in them. She feared me just as much as I feared her. "Carol, do you really think he'll stay with you? Do you think this is love?" "You're just his temporary escape from reality," I replied. She left, but I knew that conversation had been a turning point. We had been fighting the same battle, but I no longer wanted to fight. I started focusing on myself. I returned to work, reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in a long time. My life slowly began to take on a new meaning. Liam also faded into the background. He realized that I couldn't give him what he was looking for. We parted peacefully, without arguments or accusations. Nick at my door. One evening, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw Nick. He looked exhausted and sad. "Lauren, I made a mistake. Carol left me, but that doesn't matter." I realized I was wrong the moment we decided to open our marriage. "I want to come back. I want to fix everything." His words were sincere, but could I forgive him? Could I ever trust him again? Nick stood at my doorstep, and I looked at him, feeling a whirlwind of conflicting emotions inside me. Love, anger, pain, all of it mixed together, creating a storm that threatened to sweep me off my feet. "Lauren, I know I destroyed everything, but you have always been the one I lived for. I thought other relationships could fill the emptiness, but I was wrong. I need you." His voice was quiet, but there was a desperate sincerity in it. I looked at him, trying to make sense of my feelings. "You expect me to just forgive and forget? As if nothing ever happened." My words were sharp, but I couldn't hold back the truth any longer.
"No.
"I know I have to earn your trust again, and I'm willing to fight for it," he said, meeting my gaze with a look I hadn't seen in a long time, genuine honesty. After Nick left, I sat alone, reflecting on his words. The past couldn't simply be erased, but could I take the risk again? Was it worth giving him another chance? I thought about all the moments when we were truly happy, when we built our lives together. But along with that, I remembered the pain he had caused me. I decided to talk to Liam to close all unfinished business. We met in his studio, where the scent of paint and wood always lingered. "Lauren, you've decided to go back to Nick, haven't you?" he asked, not even waiting for me to speak.
"I don't know yet, Liam.
But I know I can't keep this going between us. It's not fair to you. My words were honest but heavy. I understand. But just know that I'll always be here if you ever need support," he said with a hint of sadness, but I knew he meant it. I ran into Carol in the city, by chance. She looked different, tired, drained. "Lauren, I just want to say that I never meant to ruin your marriage. Everything just happened so unexpectedly," she said, lowering her eyes. "It doesn't matter anymore, Carol. We all made our mistakes. I just want to move on," I replied calmly, realizing that I no longer held any resentment toward her. That evening, I made my decision. I invited Nick over for dinner. We sat at the table, and I could see how nervous he was, unsure of what to expect. "Nick, I can't promise that things will be like they used to be. But if we try together, maybe we have a chance," I said, looking into his eyes. His face filled with hope. "I will do everything to earn your trust back, Lauren. I promise." We decided to start over, rebuilding our relationship step by step. It wasn't easy, and the pain of the past sometimes returned like a lingering shadow. But now I knew that my strength wasn't in forgetting, it was in learning to forgive. I also made a promise to never lose myself in a relationship again. I started focusing on my passions, traveling, and working on myself. And although the future remained uncertain, I finally felt like I had found myself again.
Please subscribe to our channel Stellar Stories. We have new amazing stories coming out every day. Thank you.